You can have your opinion. I have strong opinions about life, strong opinions about how I execute, but I can also listen to someone else's side and actually learn to argue their side, because to me, that's part of the journey in life where we're just continuing to learn.
Put that coffee down.
Creators are leaders. Be careful what kind of leaders you're producing here.
Helen, we're both in sales. Let me tell you why I sucked as a salesman.
They realized that to be in power, you didn't need guns or money or even numbers. You just needed the will to do what the other guy wouldn't.
I'm not leaving. The show goes on.
Well, hello there, friend. Welcome back to the Construction Leadership Podcast. I am your host, Bradley Hartman. On the show, we bring you ideas and insights from construction leaders across the industry every single week to help you lead more effectively. This episode is brought to you by the Simple Sales Pipeline. If you're sales professionals, business development managers, or anybody else who has sales responsibilities, and regardless of what title or euphemism you give them, if they do not know down to the dollar what their sales pipeline is worth, existing accounts and prospects, you, my friend, are flying blind into economic uncertainty. But don't worry about it. We can solve it. How? Do you need a giant CRM that's going to cost you $1 million, take 5 years to implement, and then find out that nobody uses it? No, don't do that. You can solve it immediately. Well, relatively immediately, 30 minutes or less with the Simple Sales Pipeline. If you want to learn more, you want to learn more. All right, where can you learn more? TheSimpleSalesPipeline.com. Now, I am thrilled to bring to you today my conversation with the Professor Randy Birdwell. And if that sounds like a name of a famous person, this guy is famous. I mean, construction famous, but still. All right, in 1978, Randy graduated from Texas A&M University with a Bachelor of Science in Civil Engineering. Randy got into home building starting with General Homes and then led Emerald Homes, which was acquired by D.R. Horton. He launched the Houston market and expanded it to 3 additional markets. Randy pioneered custom production, positioned the company brand, and grew the division from $4 million to $33 million in book value in under 10 years. He then led the management buyout and subsequent company sale. Randy was then a regional president at D.R. Horton for 5 years before starting Grace Point Homes on his own, was also a board chair, and also joined the McCafferty Group as a managing principal. And because he doesn't know how to actually retire, he then got back teaching at Texas A&M University, his alma mater, where he has been for the last 5 years as the home building industry director and associate professor of the practice. So I had been trying to get Randy to sit down at College Station and have a conversation for some time when we both realized we would both be in Las Vegas for the International Builders Show. So Randy said, hey, let's meet up there. I said, great. We plan to do that. I get a text from Randy that says, hey, I'm running a little bit late. I need 10 minutes. I say, no problem. Literally 30 seconds later, I get a knock on the door. Who is it? Well, this is a former student and business owner named Ragen Martinek, who is a student of Professor Randy Birdwell's, who said he wanted to join in just to watch. And I informed Ragen, well, we don't really do this. This isn't like the Oprah show where you just come in and watch it. If you're going to be here, I'm going to give you a mic. You're going to be involved and you're going to ask some questions. So we got down to work. Ragen graduated from Texas A&M University in 2018. He's a former carpenter. He worked for Whiting Turner Contracting Company and now runs multiple businesses of his own, including RM2 Developments and Tier 1 Ventures. So as we're prepping Ragen to be on the podcast that he was not anticipating, here comes Randy Birdwell arriving at our suite, and he's bringing in a current student named Addison Thompson, who is extremely smart and was leading the team at the student competitions the following day. So I had the same conversation with Addison that I had for Ragen. This ain't the Phil Donahue show. She had no idea who Phil Donahue was. And I said, I'm going to give you a mic and you're going to get involved. So that is what we did here. Addison Thompson is a sophomore at Texas A&M And that is what we did here. So we kind of broke this into two segments. The first part was me covering some basic ground with the professor, Mr. Randy Birdwell. And then we took a short pause, and then we got in Ragen, we got in Addison, and we all asked some questions and had a blast. Yes, it was totally off the cuff. And no, I wouldn't change a thing. I really enjoyed all of these conversations we had and learned a lot from Professor Randy Birdwell, Ragen Martinek, and Addison Thompson. So you, my friend, are in for a treat. A little bit of a different two-part episode here featuring the Professor Randy Birdwell. As always, thank you for listening. Professor Randy Birdwell, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm just happy to be here. It's great.
So, yeah, we're calling an audible on this one. You and I connected. I was going to Houston a few weeks ago. I said, if I'm down there, is there any chance we could get together, do a podcast? You said, that's great. No, there isn't. However, I'm going to Vegas, going to IBS. Are you going to be out there? We connected. We were planning this. And then some other characters from your life, a student, a former student, are here who gave me all sorts of insights, some other questions we should ask. So we're going to get to that, but I want to lay the foundation first. If you can, take me back. You're 12 years old. You're sixth grade. Tell me geographically where you were. Maybe give me a little context about your family, siblings. And what did you think at that time you would be when you would grow up? Did you have any sense of that?
So in terms of my family, traditional family, my father was a Dow Chemical executive. My mother was a homemaker.
Okay.
I have four brothers, one sister, and all but one of us ended up going to Texas A&M and studying engineering.
Where'd the other one go?
I
got to ask.
He went in, the other one went in the Marines.
Oh, okay. All right.
And so my father basically brainwashed us to go into engineering. And I actually considered construction science. It was called building construction back then. And he basically said, no, I won't pay for that. So you need to take engineering.
Engineering.
There's not enough rigor.
Yes.
So anyway.
With your father working at Dow Chemical, obviously understanding what a fantastic brand and legacy that's with that, was that something that you guys talked about as a family around the dinner table or not necessarily?
A little bit. For example, my dad built a plant in Brazil for Dow.
Oh, wow.
And he brought back these pictures. And I remember I was probably 12 at the time. And I looked at the pictures and I saw a parking lot with hand-laid stone. And I go, why in the world did y'all spend all that money on that parking lot? And he said, because it was more economical to build the parking lot with hand-laid stone. And so stuff like that.
Okay.
And, we lived, he built a plant in Brisbane, Australia. It was a urea plant, so he had to build a gas pipeline and build a plant. And so I got to live in Australia for a couple of years too. And
what part of Australia?
Brisbane.
Okay.
And I have great memories of that.
Just curious, were there any sort of kind of cultural sort of leadership things? Because I've often found, I lived in Guadalajara for some time, and I've just found that experience of kind of the stranger in a strange land forces you to kind of reevaluate a lot of the things that you just thought were static, right? Were there anything, and how old were you when that was happening?
So 12, and like the Australians would say, 13.
Okay.
I think that you learn to adapt. So I went from a kind of a Texas Southern draw accent to a bastardized Texas accent with Australian in between, and I would say schedule and stuff like that.
Okay, sure.
And so just really adapting. And then the other thing that I've learned that I've been very effective with is I ask a lot of questions. So it's gathering the data, because from a leadership standpoint, the team can give you their vision of what occurred, and it's all different. And so the leader's got to take that information and basically analyze the data quickly and then make the call where it's appropriate if you're making the call, or trust the team member to make the call. The way I grew up, we got paid to make decisions, and I made plenty of decisions. And so, but I was taught, you're paid to make decisions, make them. So it was like, go. It's kind of like when I came in here, I said, let's go.
You did. 6 feet in the door. Let's go. I'm like, well, hold on. We're going to switch it up a little bit.
So it's kind of like this. You got to walk with a purpose.
Yep.
So
when it comes to asking intelligent questions, and I'm sure that comes over time, is that something you can teach, or is it more modeling? Because there are an innumerate amount of variables at any certain stance, and sometimes asking a decent question at this point, if there's a limited amount of time, takes away from probably asking a better question. So is there any way that you can kind of teach that to students younger, or is it more modeling, or how do you think about that?
Well, I think that basically what I'm attempting to do, besides teach students how to make money, is critical thinking, verbal communication, and written communication. So if they can communicate in writing and verbally, and they can critically think, they can get a good job in construction. Okay. And so with critical thinking comes the question. And so in terms of modeling, what you do is you use a technique called fishbowl, and you get the students in a group and you ask what is the academics call the wicked question. And that question really doesn't have an answer. And so it's how you teach critical thinking. And so they think about the issue in the fishbowl. There may be like one member from each team, 5 teams in the class, one member from each team. And then you've got the rest of the class chiming in as well as we deal with an issue like, what are the components of construction overhead or whatever?
Okay. Can you give me a recent maybe example? And this could be one made up from class or from your career that we can talk about. Is what's an example of a wicked question that you'd say, hey, for audience members who are listening, this is exactly what I'm talking about?
So one came up in a class at Texas A&M called 222. It's basically cultural discourse. It's the history of construction from antiquity to present. And as a part of that, there's a cultural discourse piece where the students meet for an hour once a week, and they deal with the issues that are happening today in construction. So the wicked question there would be, solve the immigration problem in the United States. That's a wicked question.
Got it. Vis-a-vis the labor issues we're having, we need
whatever
more people.
Okay.
It is. Got it.
One of the kids said, my dad got deported.
Okay.
So those type of issues, and we're teaching them how to do discourse without yelling at each other.
Okay. God love you. Figure that out. How can we increase that on a larger scale?
Well, I just think that what we have to do is open people's minds. You can have your opinion. I have strong opinions about life, strong opinions about how I execute, but I can also listen to someone else's side and actually learn to argue their side, because to me, that's part of the journey in life where we're just continuing to learn.
Yeah.
And so we've just got to be, one of the things about leadership is you better be a lifetime learner, because it's going to change, and you better freaking change. You better change, because if you don't, you're going to get squashed.
Yeah. Well, I can imagine too, in your history, you have dealt with a lot. I can only imagine, maybe this is a sidecar for a secondary podcast at some point, but I'm writing a very short book, almost kind of a negotiation 101 for construction supply, the buyers and sellers, on how to negotiate well. Because when I was in purchasing, I really struggled. And you would think that if you're dealing with someone who has no negotiation skills, that would be a good thing. It was often a terrible thing. As you think about kind of negotiation and are being able to argue both sides of an argument, really gives you a lot of power in understanding how are they thinking. If I was in their shoes, how would I argue this? So you can plan a little bit more effectively. Maybe let's jump ahead a little bit. I wanted to talk about General Homes and then Emerald Homes and kind of getting involved in D.R. Horton, but obviously you were involved in a lot of financing and cash raising, I'm sure, and a lot of the mathematical financial side of it. What are some of those lessons you learned of operating at that scale of publicly traded companies and opportunities like that?
Well, basically, cash flow, if the goes intos aren't more than the goes outos, you're going to lose your ass. And so that's really the fundamental side of it, and how you've got to project your cash flow. Is it an exact science? No. But I remember waking up and seeing an $800,000 hole in a cash flow, and how are you going to solve that? When we bought the company, Emerald, we basically got squeezed at the end for about $300,000. I didn't have $300,000, so we took it out of the company to pay it. And for the next 6 months, we had to make that up. And so that's where I learned about cash flow management and how trades have patterns. And we were really honest. We went to the lumber salesman and said, hey, we're paying you $1 million a month, and how can we get better terms? And he said, cut the check on the 15th like the contract, but we're going to let you FedEx the check at the end of the month to Boise up in the Northeast. And as long as they get it by the end of the month, you're good. And that was a tremendous benefit to us because we were delaying the cash out.
Yes.
And we were catching up with sales and et cetera. So that is the biggest lesson. I teach students that all the time. And they actually do a cash flow in my capstone class, which I think is the most important thing they'll ever do.
Yeah. Well, this will often come up, and we're just talking, and obviously we've been going on 10, 12 years of a bull run, depending on what market you're in the United States. But sometimes we forget the number one reason companies go out of business is they don't have any cash.
They do. They bleed to death. But the number one reason why they bleed to death from a cash flow standpoint, they don't know their cost. And in my little consulting business, the number one thing I see continually is they don't know their cost.
You go into a business, you're teaching to students. Someone's listening here and they're thinking, I wonder if Professor Birdwell is referring to our situation. Do we really know our costs? We often talk specifically on the sales side is kind of the cost to serve. Do we truly understand the direct and indirect costs and where that comes from? Are there a few questions that come to mind for you where you'd say, all right, I've got an elevator ride. I'm going to give you 1 minute of free consulting. Here are the top 2 questions, or the number one question you need to ask when you start truly digging into this. Where do you start?
Basically, what's your variance to budget with respect to cost? And in home building, it should be a 0.5 point of sales.
Okay.
And so it never is. And again, it's just fundamentals. You've got to know your cost. So the academic theory of making money is revenue minus the cost of goods sold equals profit. And what we do at Texas A&M and Capstone is we take that theory and we turn it into a practical experience. Okay. That's what we do. And so when I say I teach kids to make money, that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah. I want to ask you about teaching to win, but I'm going to save that until we get Ragen and Addison in here. I got out, started Pulte Homes right out of school in August of 2000. And even though there was that tech bubble that happened in 2001, that largely didn't affect home building, especially in the Chicagoland area where I was, much at all. So from 2000 to 2000, call it 7, we had a series of young leaders who at the time were probably early to mid 30s. And my perspective was, and they had been in the business, going on 15, 18 years at that point, every decision they had made was fabulously correct. Every single one. And it didn't seem like there was a tailwind that everyone was successful. And then all of a sudden, 2007 hits, and everything that they had been doing that had been right now appeared to be the exact wrong thing. And a lot of them really struggled. And I was young enough to just kind of look up this, and I didn't know anything. As you were kind of involved in the business going into the Great Recession, as you look back on that time, and understanding that, coming out of the Great Recession, dude, we've had a really good decade plus there. What were some of the leadership lessons you pulled from that? And maybe for some young folks who were like, if that happened in 2012, Addison was like, 8? Are there any sort of leadership lessons that you can share about that time to say, listen, you want to say history rhymes or repeats, whatever you want, but these are lessons you got to learn, and here's what we learned going through the Great Recession?
Well, hopefully we'll never do that again. But from a people point of view, I believe people are your greatest assets. Unfortunately, in that period, we're talking about 70% of the builders in the country go broke. And in that period, we've got to shed staff. And so basically, if you're going to shed staff, you shed the lowest level in your managers, the ones who do have experience. You simply, their altitude has to go lower.
Okay.
Their pay is going to go down, but you keep the talent. And so basically, when you're in a situation like that, which is extreme,
absolutely,
the question is, how do you keep your talent? And that was a way to do it.
How does that differ from any day-to-day? Because this is kind of a common theme, which is if you have a strong team around you, you have talented people you're with, number one, you're going to enjoy it more and you'll be able to grow more and everyone will have more opportunities. How does that differ from, on the downswing to attracting talent and growing when it's the exact opposite? You're trying to scale up and get as much talent as you can.
Well, on the downside, you're trying to survive. So that's where it is extremely important to project your cash flow. And I recommend we projected our cash on a 13-week basis, an annual basis, and then we projected out 5 years. The 5-year part kind of goes out the window because when you're growing a home building company, you're going to tie up land and you don't need the cash for that land deal for probably 2 years as you're trying to entitle it and do all the things that you get to do under the contract before you're going to pay for it. And so you're basically relying on growth to fund that project, okay? That's why if you're trying to grow your company, it's so important to plan your cash. Now, today, basically, you've got to prove it every day as the CEO, establishing the culture that people are your greatest assets, and you have to show it to your people. You have to demonstrate that to your employees. And today, you've got to create opportunity for people. So if you're just flat, then you really don't need a high performer. You can just get a plotter and go good enough. We were never that way. To me, that's not excellence. It's not about good enough. It's about excellence, and we were always growing. So that was just a mindset. And some people say it's a sickness. Okay, we can be a sickness, but that's what we did.
Got it. Our audience will have a lot of folks that are coming from the supply side and the distribution side. Any insights or recommendations or stories for them where you can say, when I was running, maybe this is as a project manager or as a CEO, you say, and I think you just kind of gave one example, a subtle thing. You call the lumber salesperson, he says, here's the deal. I'm going to give you another 15 days to buy you time where you can have the cash and we don't have your cash. Any other stories come to mind where you'd say, this might be, maybe it's counterintuitive or maybe it's something simple that isn't done often enough, but any recommendation for our distribution or supply side folks on how they can stand out and add more value to builders?
It's real simple. You want to have a partner with the vendor. You don't want the vendor making dry runs. So as a builder, we've got to be very conscious of that. We've got to do our business in a way that is good for them. But don't send me a damn stack of invoices when I gave you POs, because I'm going to throw them in the trash can. So here's the deal. If you're a vendor, how do you add value to the builder? You got to know the builder and you have to understand how they're operating. So find out how they're operating. If you don't understand their strategic plans, then find out what they are. And then you can adapt to that. And basically, if a builder is telling you he's going to do 1,000 units this year, he's trying his darndest to do that. So how are you going to alter your business to serve him? And if you can't serve him, you need to tell him, and he can get another supplier. So I think the other thing is look, in home building, if you look at the revenue model, the economic model, half of it is sticks and bricks. So where should the builder focus? It's not rocket science. You focus on the biggest thing. And so that's why the builders focused on sticks and bricks. And frankly, purchasing is an unappreciated position in home building. I think it should be elevated. I believe it should report to the division level, not the VP of construction, who's going to manipulate it to affect all his field work. Mm-hmm. When Horton bought our company, we built homes cheaper than they did. We're a little
you can say it. It's okay.
We're a chicken shit home builder with 4 divisions. And here they are. They were building 20,000+ houses. And we were building houses cheaper than they were. And that was because structurally, the way they were set. And in home building, number one, you focus on sales. Nothing happens till you sell something. D.R. Horton used to say that all the time. But the second piece is you've got to focus on cost, and you got to know them. And that's what everyone's got to understand. If you're building 50,000 units and you can save $100, it makes a big impact, assuming that's a good decision. And the other piece with respect to your comment about negotiating, don't negotiate this. Don't use the same negotiating tactics with them. You've got to use different ones. And so surprise them. And if you don't know what tactics are available, go on the airplane when you're riding and there's a negotiating course.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I took that course 40 years ago. And so it was very effective for me in styling negotiation.
Yeah. I literally, so as I'm wrapping up this book on negotiation, it's a lot of my stories, but it's also getting to yes. And a lot of these classic ones that are out there. Kind of, hey, I'll read it. I'm going to distill it just for our little tribe here in construction. There's a book I stumbled across. I never even heard of it. I think it's called 99 Negotiating Tactics. I'm like, where the hell did this thing come from? I bought it. It was $15, really short. It's like 105 pages. Every page is like one paragraph. But there's, how to use silence. There's like 4 different ways to use silence. And to your point, educate yourself, figure it out. None of these things are, you don't need a PhD to learn.
It's not rocket science.
It's not rocket science. And we're gonna tie that back to
my favorite story on that is Mr. Speckmeyer. I was buying his farm from him. We were going to do a 1041 exchange, and talking to Mr. Speckmeyer, we walk in there, and Mr. Speckmeyer brings us into his house, and he's sitting on his hands. He's sitting on his hands. And so finally, I'm just going, okay, Mr. Speckmeyer, I got to ask you this, sir. Why are you sitting on your hands? And Mr. Speckmeyer said, my father told me that when I'm around a promoter like you, I sit on my hands so I never sign anything. So just stuff like that you deal with in life.
You can't leave me or the audience hanging. What happened with you and Mr. Speckmeyer?
We did the deal. I found him a 240-acre farm.
Okay.
Up the road, up to 90 from where he was, past Navasota. And so we traded his 80 acres for the 240-acre farm. And as a part of the contract, Mr. Speckmeyer, who is German descent, wrote in the contract that he could remove the manure pile, because in his culture that he grew up in, the bigger your manure pile, the more prosperous you were.
All right.
And so it worked out great, and it's a community in Houston today.
That's wild. Okay. All right. Professor Birdwell, this has been great. We're going to transition. We're going to bring in a couple other voices from students current and past and ask you a few more questions.
Great.
All right. We're back here with part 2 of our interview with Professor Randy Birdwell. So we had to call an audible. You decided to bring friends, somewhat unannounced, to the party. And I said, well, if they're going to come to the party, we're going to there's no bystanders. We're going to get them involved. So we have Ragen, former student, builder, land developer. And we also have Addison current student. So I'm going to tee this off here. So you mentioned something, Ragen, as you scared the hell out of us by showing it early. You mentioned the phrase that Professor Birdwell teaches students how to win. What do you mean by that? And then maybe, Professor, you can give us some more context on it.
So Professor Birdwell has more of an aggressive approach to teaching, and A&M has a phenomenal program with producing students and getting their knowledge and expertise to a level well known within the industry. His course is a very trial by fire, and he kind of seeks some of those out who can handle a little more strain and stress, and he just kind of releases you to the wolves and says, you're going to make it, you're going to think critically. I'm not going to let you fail, but I'm going to make you, struggle to keep your head above water. And in that sense, he kind of, I think pointed earlier, where it just stretches everyone's ladder of those that he knows can handle it. He will stretch it, say, okay, you may not know it yet, but I'm going to show you what you're made of and what you can handle, and try to open new doors for you and just have a wider bandwidth of what you should look for in life.
Got it. Can you give me an example? When you say trial by fire, I have a general idea what that means. What does that mean from a student perspective?
So we were students and had never had any sort of residential course. We've never had a land development course. He says, okay, here's 100 acres, develop it. That's it. There's your
full stop.
There's your direction. It's like, we have a guy, he's going to come in and he's going to show you a performa. You're going to build your own performa. And that's like, the rest of the creativity is up to you. And you're like, okay, what does that mean? Build a land development. Okay. And so it just, because that's what you have to do within the industry, and that's what he had to do. And it was his first semester of teaching, and that's what he's used to, as he said earlier, just everyone always achieving excellence, striving for excellence. You may not know it yet, but if you have the attitude and you chase the excellence, we can learn the rest. So he really just pushed everyone, and our brains may have been fried at the end of the day, but he was always there to help after hours, whatever the case was. Whether we wanted it or not, it was, hey, you're gonna succeed. I'm gonna help you get here.
Well, from the outside, I would probably 7 or 8 years, maybe not, 6 or 7 years of me working in the business full time to get to that, to truly understand the fundamentals of how a business runs. Because I just started, we were building homes, and I was running around like an idiot trying to figure that out, right? So learning that before you even know really what it's like to work full-time on a job site is just, fascinating. I'm jealous. I wish I learned that. Professor, give us a little context between, is this just the only way you know how to teach, and probably something similar you're doing to teaching your own people at General and Emerald and Grace Point, or has that changed a little bit where you say, I know there's a method behind the madness. There's probably very little in life you do that is just, I woke up and thought this was a good idea and let's just see what happens. But maybe just tell, I want to stay away from the word pedagogy. You and I both had to look it up before you said it. How do you think about that when you hear, Ragen talk about it from his perspective? How does that make you feel?
I'm very proud of Ragen, and it's wonderful because the approach is a fire hose approach. So I know this much about home building, and I've got this much time. Okay. So I don't have a lot of time, and I'm extremely accessible. That's very important. And in this course that Ragen taught, which is a capstone course, and it's basically a housing project due diligence that from A to Z. And in that course, again, they're drinking from a fire hose because they've never even been exposed to these concepts. They know how to schedule. They know how to figure cost. They know concepts of project management, construction management, and a little bit about legal. And we just put that all together in this project, and they really show me what they know. But again, when you're teaching, you basically, I'm adjusting my style to how I read the crowd. And I explain things differently to different students because I understand their base personality and how they're learning. And so that is critical. But it's critical in management. You don't manage everybody the same. That's insane. And so I don't manage students the same. So it's really a CEO approach. And the outcome's fantastic because they just went through this process, took a lot of time, critical thinking over the top, lots of critical thinking. And they produce this result. And then they're challenged by, when they make their final presentation, the industry experts who are the judges challenge them on every decision they made. And so that's practical education. So the theory, everybody goes, well, what's the theory of your course? Well, the revenue minus the cost of goods sold equals profit. But we apply that in a practical way to a real project.
So Ragen gave me a little bit of a story. Said at one point in time, pre-Professor Birdwell, the residential construction capstone course was the easiest class to take for a capstone. Am I totally ruining the story here?
Nope, that's correct.
And then he was not available to be in that class. And then you asked who is in this class because it's easy. And then there were spots available for Ragen to take this class. Can you fill in the gaps on what happened between those two parts of the story, please?
Well, I understood the student perception prior to me arriving at Texas A&M with respect to the course. And
which was what?
The students thought it was the easy capstone.
Okay.
And I don't want to go any further than that with respect to that. Sure. But I was aware that was a perception. So I just came in and I said, okay, who took this class? Because they thought it was the easy capstone. And about 9 students raised their hand. And I said, it is no longer the easiest capstone. It is now the hardest capstone. So I highly recommend you select another capstone.
Okay.
And quite a few students chose another course. And that opened the door for Ragen to come into the class.
There you go. Right.
And so because he couldn't get in, and now he's got a chance to get in. So that's how Ragen and my paths crossed.
Crossed initially. Great. Addison, I'm curious. Obviously, you guys have spent a lot of time. You're here. You're spending, you mentioned it's fill in the blanks for me, every Sunday evening at his home with your students for 5 months, preparing for what you presented here in Vegas. Is that right?
Yes, that's right.
So talk to me, maybe add on or give me a little context about maybe what you find either valuable and or different in terms of teaching style, maybe just kind of building off of maybe Ragen's experience, and maybe it's softened, maybe it's gotten more abrasive with time. I'm just curious from your perspective in his classes now. Tell me what that's like.
Well, I think I actually get a very unique approach because I work for the department. I am one of his students, and I'm also a member of the National Association of Home Builders competition team. And so what that looks like is we get to go to faculty lunches together. I get to see him in class. And then Sunday, we eat dinner together, and we get to talk about our week. And so not only do I get to see him as a fellow staff member, we work together, but also I get to see him as someone who's a mentor. One of the things that I think is really special about our department especially is that construction science is the second smallest major on A&M's campus. The smallest is English, and it's the second smallest, but it is one of the largest construction programs in the United States. And I think what's so unique about it is I know that I can call Professor Birdwell when I need anything. Every time I've signed a contract, I've called him. And I've made sure they're not BSing me. They're not lowballing me.
Just curious, what contracts are you signing?
I'm on my second internship now.
Okay.
Yes. So both estimating internships.
Okay.
And I called him and I said, I think they're lowballing me. I said, I have experience now. And he was like, well, ask for the living. Even if you're living at home, ask for the living. And I'm like, well, are you sure? He's like, yeah. He goes, you bring worth. And that's what's so important is Professor Birdwell has told me so many times, again, you're a dominant person. And when you're a dominant person, he and I both are in the same way, area that we can see the critical path. We know how to get from A to B, and we can see that. And what's so interesting is that he has to teach people who do not see that. And he has to teach them how to see from A to B. And that's not necessarily a very concrete idea that you can teach. If you ask somebody, how to build a home, they don't really know. Construction science at Texas A&M is not a very residential forward program. Mm-hmm. It's more of a commercial program. So the fact that he is taking the time to teach us about things that we've never even heard of, that we should have heard about our freshman year, is incredibly, it's inspiring because he has passion. And that's what makes him a great teacher, is because he has passion about what he's doing. He doesn't have to be here. In fact, it's probably a waste of his time. But the fact that he is, willing to talk to me on the phone whenever he probably has a million other things he can do, just to talk about my itty bitty money that I'm making, that's what is valuable.
Yeah. Powerful kind of perspective there. Professor, I found that interesting too, is the first time when I went and spoke to the CIAC, and I spent a decade, obviously, in the residential side, and then launched my own business and found the vast majority of it was on the commercial side and some heavy highway, and then a smaller segment was residential. So the last decade of my career has been more on that side. So I sit down next to you. I'm just assuming I'm sitting next to a professor. I'm assuming you're another commercial guy. And I don't know, I was probably annoying you, just peppering you with questions. I'm sitting next to the residential guy, and I did not know your background at that point. So I just started asking you a bunch of questions. How does, again, understanding Texas A&M's construction and engineering pedigree nationally, and understanding this is a small, powerful segment. However, there's a lot of other schools that they do probably less residential than you guys do, but this is such a differentiator for folks. I'm just thinking a lot of folks who are in the business now that they would probably love to learn or need to learn what you guys are already learning in class before you even hit the job site. Does that change your approach at all when you are just one small sliver of the pie with a bunch of other kind of commercial folks around you?
No. It's a good thing in a way because they're coming to me. They really don't know anything about the industry, and I get to share with them about it. And we get to walk together through the process of this capstone project and how I teach it and how the student has deliverables and how they execute. So through funding, through the National Housing Endowment, A&M received funds, and I was able to use those funds to develop a new home building elective. It's called COSI 303, high performance building, high performance residential building. And I use that as a home building elective to teach the stages of construction, about production home building, about custom building, and then use ASHRAE 700, the National Green Building Standards, and bring that to the students. That's an opportunity now for students to learn more about residential that Ragen, for example, he didn't have. So we did make curriculum changes. It was approved. I'm proud of that. I'm proud that I'm a champion for housing at Texas A&M. That's my job. I was hired by now interim Dean Sewerman to be all things housing for Texas A&M. That's what I do. That's what I did. And honestly, I'm not interested in training people to be project managers. I'm interested in training students to be owners. It's just a different approach.
Yeah. So, all right, you mentioned Dr. Pat Sewerman. I'm going to ask you a question, and then why don't we go Ragen? You get to ask one question. Addison, one question. You're going to bring us home, and we're going to get the hell out of here. So I must have sent an email to Dr. Pat that was of some length, that was longer than necessary. And he responded something that included bluff, B-L-U-F, and didn't explain what it was. Well, I guess he was hoping I was intelligent enough to look it up. So I looked it up. It's from the military. It means bottom line up front. And his point was shorter, faster, funnier would be ideal. I have noticed in our brief exchange that you are a man of very few words digitally, which is quite the contrast with you in person. You've got quite a bit to say. Tell me a little about your own communication style, because I would send and I started dialing back. I would send you an email and you would send me a 2-word response. Then I would send you a 6-word email and you would send me a 1-word response. And finally I just said, I made fun of it. I said, obviously you like to keep these really short. And do you remember what your response was? I'm sure you've given this before, but do you remember what you said?
I do not.
You wrote it. You were just like, yep, keep it short, just to the point. Let's keep moving. And I'm like, all right. And I think my response to you was all right. And that was it. So obviously, I think that would probably go back to as a CEO, as a professor, you're cranking out emails all the time, but you changed my behavior by the fact that how you communicate online. How much of that is really you talked about critical thinking, verbal communication, and written communication. Is that part of it, of just 20 words or less?
I think it is. I think that when we use a whole lot of words trying to explain something, that people get confused. And so the bottom line is, and I was taught at Texas A&M a long time ago to write at a 5th grade level, and everybody makes fun of that. But 5th graders, if you look up what they can do from a writing standpoint in the testing of students at that age group, it's very adequate. And so there's just no confusion. There's no confusion when you're dealing with me on how we communicate. I'm going to give you an answer. And why do I need to take 6 sentences when I can do it in 4 words? Yeah. So, yes, I think that's a leadership thing. And I believe communication is the responsibility of the sender. So I'll give you an example in Ragen's class. I started talking to them. This is my first year teaching. I'm talking to them about cash flow and preferred rates of returns and waterfalls and all this stuff. And one of the students in Ragen's class raised his hand and said, "Professor Birdwell, we don't know a damn thing. We don't know what you're talking about." I said, "Okay." And you got to adjust. You got to watch your language, because all these terms like close the deal, closing, all this lingo from our industry, they had never heard. And so that was the biggest adjustment I had to make as an educator to make sure I was clear. So
that's great. All right, Ragen, one question. You wrote down 13. You get to pick one. What is it?
So I have a few business questions. Can I ask one business question and one personal question?
You can
answer to.
What?
Okay.
Yes, of course you can.
Perfect. First business question. You obviously have us when we are just beginning, learning at the very base level. Can you think back to your very, very beginning? What do you remember it being like when you were learning? You hadn't done 50 houses, 100 houses, 200 houses. What was it like for you to learn, and what do you remember going through back then now?
The best example I have is, so I'm at General Homes. They don't know how to develop land. They hire me from Texas A&M with a degree in civil engineering. I'm right out of school, and I'm put into this land development company, and we're just kind of finding our way. And then the treasurer came and said, "You guys are doing so many deals, you've got to finance your own projects." And so the book that you put together in my class, that book came from the book I put together for the banks to get financing. So I was having to raise money to do these projects, and I went to the banks and learned what they needed and basically did the loan officer's work. And so I'd walk in there with the 100-page book, just like I taught you, and I put it on their desk, and I never, ever had a deal declined because we had every detail possible about the project, the market, the cost, how we were going to execute the schedule, et cetera, and the unleveraged internal rate of return.
And we still put together those books in class and in the real world now. So lastly, this is a personal value, but subjectively, I'm curious, in your eyes, how could your students and successors pay you back for everything that you put into them?
Wow. They don't need to pay me back because I'm paying it forward. That's my job. That's why That's my purpose right now. I was created at this moment in time to be doing this, to share with Texas A&M students, my alma mater that I love, basically how to make money in construction. So they don't owe me a damn thing. It's just what you do.
Well, we all appreciate everything that you do put into us, and hopefully you are proud for all of the leaders that you create out in the world.
I am, and I'm looking forward to more.
All right. Addison, now, if you want to, we give an inch, he takes a mile. If you would like to ask 2 questions, that's it's up to you.
We'll see. So what specific traits do you see in someone that makes you think that they would be a good leader?
So I can read people really well, and I was taught the DISC system. So dominant, influential, basically the servant, and then the cautious one. And so I explain it this way. We're in an elevator, and the guy pushing the button, okay, that's the dominant, and the lady talking to everybody and misses the elevator, that's the high I, the influencer. And the person like my wife, Suzanne, she would just stand there. Everybody else would get on the elevator, and she'd miss it. You know, she lets everybody go first. And then my favorite is the high C. They get on the elevator, and they look at everybody, and they start making calculations about how much they weigh and totaling it up. And they look at the big plaque on the elevator that says 2,500 pounds, and they compare it to that. So that's the basic thing that you need to know about people. And so when I see people like you who are strong females, dominant, and also, so you're a high D, high I know if you apply yourself, you're going to win.
Well, thank you very much. And I would say my other question for you would be, what would you say to the person that wants to be in home building, but they find themselves at a crossroads or a roadblock? What would you say to them?
I really never direct students into commercial versus home building. The national home builders will be shocked. I think that's something that you have to make that decision as a person. But I know that a lot of my students who chose commercial, who took my class, they're coming back to home building. So it's just a process. There's nothing wrong with commercial. It's a good way to introduce yourself to construction management. But my path was just different. And you know what? I'm really glad the path I took.
Awesome. I think that's a great place to end. Professor Birdwell, thank you. Addison, Ragen, you had no idea you were going to be thrown into this. You guys were awesome. I appreciate you guys making time. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right then, friends, how did that go? Hopefully you enjoyed my conversation with Professor Randy Birdwell, Ragen Martinek, and Miss Addison Thompson. I really enjoyed this. And while there was plenty of uncertainty because we normally don't do shows like this, I wouldn't change a thing because I loved having Ragen and Addison involved. And they asked questions that I would not known, given the fact that I haven't learned directly from him in the classroom, but I certainly learned from him in this episode. If you got value from this, please share it with your network. You can also go to YouTube. That's what all the cool kids are doing. You can go to YouTube, you can look up Bradley Hartman & Co., and you can see the video from our conversation that we recorded at our suite in Mandalay Bay in Las Vegas, America's Playground. And if you did get value from it, please rate and review the show. That means more to us than you know. This episode is brought to you by the Simple Sales Pipeline. If you are interested in organizing and valuing to get a solid sales forecast in the next 30 minutes for any of your sales professionals, you will want to go check out the simpleSalesPipeline.com. We made it just for you. We made it just for our construction clients. Again, you can learn more at thesimplesalespipeline.com. And that, my friend, is all I have for you today. We're going to close out with our leadership mantra. You, my friend, are owed nothing. Deliver value first. Make it a great week.